interview with Rabbi Michael Mandel. This is tape 5. Rabbi, you were telling me about working in the Levant, the youth...
Levante.
Levante. Thank you. You were telling me about being forced to do push-ups by the people in charge. Did that ever happen to you personally?
Yes. But that was in my hometown. When I came to Budapest, it was no longer so because I did not have to attend.
Okay, now moving on to 43 and 44. What happened next?
On the 19th of March, 1944, the Germans marched in. They came overnight and just occupied Hungary, and that was that. I was coming in from Rákoszenmihely on the Monday morning, and found something quite strange. I did not know what was happening. Nobody really knew. But the traffic was different. I do not know, something noticeable, but did not quite make out what was noticeable. We could still work in the factory for a short while, as it turned out to be. Very soon after that, we had to wear the yellow star. All those who were of Jewish birth, even if it's 1/8 of the forebears, one of the 8 forebears was Jewish, you were regarded as Jewish.
How was that administered? How were you informed of that?
Oh, it was put in papers, and we were quite properly informed about it. The Jewish Council informed also. They were forced to inform us. In other words, they were instructed to inform us. And very soon after, between the ages of 16 and 60 men, at that stage only men, and then very soon after women from 16 to 36 were required to present themselves, report for work, and according to where you lived and so on. Simultaneously, there was a concentration of people of the Jewish faith in certain designated houses, which was called starred. A star, a Jewish star, was on the gate, and it was a csillagos ház, it was called. Csillag means star, and ház means house. So csillagos ház. And I went to live with a family. The man was still alive when I was in Hungary last year. I don't know, he was in hospital at the time. I couldn't visit him, unfortunately. He had very serious heart surgery. Stieber Gyuri, George Stieber was his name.
Could you spell that, please?
Stieber, S-T-I-E-B-E-R, Stieber. And he lives in Budapest. He's got one only son. I was in Luisa utca 1B, Luisa Street 1B. They took that street, and it was like a out of proportion, in other words, preponderantly Jewish houses and apartment or flat houses, apartment buildings, and they concentrated us, for instance, in Luzauca 1B, which had 3 stories. It had a square courtyard, huge gates. Opposite the gate was the concierge, the caretaker's house or dwelling. And I lived with Stiebers in a very, they took, they were about, I think, about 30 flats or 30 units. And they put into it over 300 people in those 30 units. It was very much congested. I mean, Julie and I slept in the same bed because there was no other way. Or on the floor if I wanted to be separate.
Who else was living in that apartment?
Who was living there? Stieber, Julie's sister and mother. His father died before. And Stieber, Erzsi, the sister, that's Elizabeth, the equivalent of Erzsi, but used to work at my uncle's the brazier and foundation garment shop in Okasfoce. That's why I went there, because I slept there, but I ate at the dwelling of Mrs. Weinberger, whose daughter lives in Israel, in Tel Aviv.
At this point, were you still able to work in your uncle's factory?
No. Soon after that, we were just not able to work there. But we had to present ourselves for work. And that was, I remember, on the post, on the, the lamp posts. They were stuck on it, the information, and also on wall, I call it, Foliújság, what do I call it when they put the notice on the...
Posters.
On the posters on the, it's a sort of a board, and they stuck it on. And that was by the Jewish Community Council, Zsidó Tanács, Jewish Council.
And where did you go?
Wherever I had to go, where I had to report. And we were taken to a place called Ferryhead, the airport, and there had to do quite a bit of work.
What sort of work?
What sort of work? Road building and digging trenches, etc., in expectation of Russian invasion.
What were the conditions that you were working under?
Well, we were not supplied with any rations at first. We had to bring our own. Eventually they were supposed to give us rations, but quite often they didn't. It was sent perhaps from the headquarters, but it disappeared into the tummies of the guards. Often they took it away.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
I mean, my fellow youngsters and old people, from 16 to 60, old people.
Did you make friends with anyone in particular?
Well, Mrs. Weinberg's son, Poldi, was one of them. Usually we had to go to the place of work, not by transport, but on foot, 10, 15 kilometers.
Who took you there?
As I'm telling you, the Hungarian fascists, usually, they were in charge of the...
Did they have uniforms?
Yes.
Do you remember? Can you describe those for me?
Green, a green sort of a wild green color, and with an armband, the arrow cross armband on it, and shielded caps.
What?
And some of the officers with shielded caps, but the others with the looks like the American or the Tito's partisans had those partisan hats, you know, with a fold-up business.
What hours did you work?
Well, we had to get up quite early and had to walk to the workplace, and there we would arrive around about 7 o'clock. We got up about 5:30, walked for about an hour and a half or more, depending where we were, and worked there till more or less nightfall.
Were you fed?
Weapon,
Were you fed?
as I say, at that stage we were given some rations, very little. We had everyone had to have one of those military metal, I don't know how to call it. It's called, in Hungarian it's called chajka. Those military soup bowls or whatever, squarish soup bowls with a lid on it, and it was fastened so that it doesn't. And we had black bread and black coffee, but it wasn't real coffee. It was chicory, or whatever it's called, made of corn, whatever. And given a piece of bread, which had to last us for the whole day. Sometimes we were given some soup.
How did the
with a few potato peels swimming in it.
How did the people who were guarding you treat the workers?
Well, we had both German and, at one stage, both German and Hungarian guards. The Hungarians were much worse than the Germans.
In what way?
They hit us more often, they were more rigorous, more demanding.
Were you ever struck?
Oh yes.
For what reason?
If somebody escaped, they took a group of youngsters, the youngest ones amongst us. I was one of them. And they beat us to tell if we knew about it when they were running away or when they were trying to disappear. There was a Zählappell, or what do they call it? We had to tell our names present, you know. How they call it? I don't know how they call it.
Roll call.
Roll call, therefore the roll call, that's right. The roll call, and if the roll call was short of a few people, 1 or 2 or 3, if they disappeared during the night or something, during the day even, we were beaten quite hard with whips.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah. Not once, not twice, many times.
Does that
We
mean...
were the büntetet osztag. Büntetet osztag, the punishing group, or the group to be punished. Because they were hoping that if we are going to be beaten and tortured, then we are going to spill the beans and tell who, if we knew about, if they were aided by someone, who, when, where.
Were there
He
many?
knew nothing.
Were there
He
many
knew nothing.
escapes?
Pardon?
Were there many escapes?
There were a few escapes, but each one of them was because they had the whole description of everything about us. And it was not easy to escape. But if they'd managed to escape, we were beaten.
Were any of the beatings? Did any of the beatings take place as a result of some other incident apart from an escape?
If we did not do enough work, if the work was insufficient, suppose we had to do of carrying stuff from one place to another at the airfield and the airport, and it wasn't enough, beatings followed, and the day extended quite a bit. So instead of finishing, shall we say, at 6 or 6:30, we would finish about 9:30.
What was the extent of your own personal injuries as a result of these beatings?
Of this, well, I just had scars on my leg, and this was here. That was during 1944, when I was interrogated about my uncle, where he was and so on.
What happened? Where was your uncle?
My uncle went into hiding. He disappeared. It was still in those days when he was in the factory, but by that time Mr. Halmai, who was a very fine man, God bless his memory, he was a very fine man. He was actually a swimming champion. He was in Australia, in Sydney, I think in 1932 or 36 or whatever. He was a member of the lower nobility of Hungary. And the authorities thought that he will be a good anti-Semite who can take over the factory, etc. And he did, but he was not a bad person, he was a good person.
Could you spell his name?
Halmai, yes, Halmay.
Do you know his first name?
I can't remember, unfortunately. I don't think I can remember. My cousin in Israel would probably remember it. I can't remember it, unfortunately.
What happened after he took over your uncle's factory?
When he took over, he called in my uncle and he said to him, I want you to be my office boy. And he did that out of kindness to my uncle. Because first of all, he didn't understand how to run the factory or how to do anything. But he said that I want you to be my office boy, and spoke to him very harshly, and in Hungarian, of course, in front of other people that were there, the factory manager and so on. And they were watching with glee how my uncle would react that I want to be my office boy. He was the managing director of the owner of the place. And then comes in this stranger and said, I want you to be my office boy. And when they were not there, the others, he said to my uncle, look, don't worry one little bit. I shall not do you any harm. I am not here to do you any harm, or I don't want anything of yours. You will be my so-called office boy, and you will tell me what to do, and I will do whatever I have to do. But please rest assured that I am not an anti-Semite, etc. And it was like a Mashiach to my uncle. But during this time, the factory was an entrance here, not the corner, and an entrance there. And 3 people came in. This is very relevant to my story. My uncle was a very generous man, and he very often helped people who were coming to him for money. And in came these 3 men, and I thought I was not supposed to be there. It so happened that my aunt sent me to my uncle to the factory and to the wholesale section to get some money and do some shopping with the ration cards, with the coupons. And 3 people came in, and I had in my imagination that the center one is a Jew and the 2 others are Gentiles. Now that would be nothing surprising, because very often those who were in Hungary in the forced labor camp would sometimes bribe some of the guards to come with them and come to my uncle, where they would get some money and would get some bakshish and so on. And I thought that that was one of them. This was the case. I was not supposed to be there, but I heard just before they entered, as they came in, before they came in, I could see them through the glass partition there. My uncle went into another part of the wholesale section, where there was an office part of the dispatch department. And he lifted up the receiver and he said, yes, yes, igen, put down the receiver, didn't take his hat or anything. He just walked out of the place. And I thought, as was his wont, he went every day, starting at the bottom floor and went up to the first floor to just have a look at the people at work. He was checking whether the elasticity is correct and so on, because of the tension of the... And I thought, so when they came in and I was behind the counter there, where I was not supposed to be, but I thought to myself, nothing so terrible, because he's a Jew. But I did not give myself away, thank goodness. So he said, can we see Mr. Mandel? In Hungarian, of course. And I said, yes, he was here a moment ago. Just let me go and check it. And that was my luck. I went out, the same place where my uncle went out, and I had a quick look on the bottom floor. I thought that my uncle may be there. I thought that this middleman was a Jew, was coming to ask from my uncle some money and to give it to the 2 guards as well. Sort of got half a day off from the forced labor camp. And so I went to look for my uncle, and then I went up the first floor and asked Mr. Major, have you seen my uncle? He says, yes, he was here a moment ago, he just went down. Showed me where he went down, and I followed that. That was the showroom for the brassiers and corsets and so on. And one of the girls there said, your uncle was here, but he left. A moment ago, he just left. It turned out to be the following. Now this is a very, very important thing for you to know. My uncle was a well-to-do man. He had the money in the Anglo-Italian, not Anglo-Italian, the the Hungarian-Italian discount bank. That's where he was banking. And the money that he had in that bank was just with a stroke of a pen taken away, and that was that. But he had also Swiss bank accounts, coded bank accounts. And when they got to know about him, because, from the Jewish Community Council, they had the list of names, addresses, everything. And they went to the place where he lived, not to the factory. In that place where it was called the Singer Palace, it was called. It's a condominium. Lived on the 3rd floor. It was a very nice place there. And there was downstairs was a concierge, and which you had to buzz and to be entered and so on. There was a very nice lift. It was built by the Singer, the sewing machine people, but they migrated a couple of years later to England. And this caretaker or concierge was a rotter. His wife, a very nice person. And my uncle was so kind to him. He put through his only son university to study for architecture, and he finished it, and he was all right. So but he was a Jew hater, not his wife, and that saved us. When the Nazis came in, and the Gestapo came in and asked for Mr. Mandel, he said, sure, I'll take you up to there. So the lift was, just went up. Before that, somebody went up, and it had to go to the 5th floor, and it had to wait until it comes down. In the meantime, when the wife perceived what's happening, she quickly took the intercom and phoned my aunt and said, Mrs. Mandel, they are looking for you and your husband. She left the place, did not take her handbag or anything, just nothing. Left the place, left the door ajar, and went up the 5th floor. Now, if somebody wants to escape, usually goes down. But no, she went upstairs to the 5th floor to a family called Senesh. Mrs. Weinreb and her daughter.
Could you spell that name, Senesh?
Senesh, S-Z-E-N-E-S. And a few years ago, she was still alive. She came to Australia, and she lives in Sydney. She lived in Sydney. She might still be living in Sydney. But her daughter, that was born in that place, and she was a little baby, and her nephew was my best friend, Baruch. Was his surname. His father went to Portugal or Spain. And anyway, Weinreb Lily, the sister, lives in Sydney, still in Surrey Hills, as far as I know, or at least she lived there for a while.
What happened after your auntie went up to the Senesh apartment?
Yes. Anyway, they had apparently an agreement, an arrangement, that if something like this should happen, they are going to meet up at an appointed place. It was my uncle's barber's shop that they are going to meet up. And my auntie went to eventually, when the Germans left and then the Gestapo left, she just went down. They did not know who it was. And she went to not very far, around the corner from the factory, she went to the barber's place. There they met up. And I had a cousin by the name of Schreiber,